I would like now to give the floor to you, Sally. So, Sally, I want to introduce you. You have, you're first of all, you're former Minister of the UK in international collaboration. Actually, what we have been speaking about, Sally, here today is the sense that so much is destroyed, but international collaboration itself is really under destruction. And that this really worries us. I think I leave that with the words that Christina said. If there is no shield anymore in the law of protection, then where do we turn to with all of these situations that we've heard of today? You have been among us all the time in raising the voice on what was happening in Tigray and so many other places. And we really look forward to hearing from you but how do we make sense of everything that we have been listening to today? Sally, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate also the chance to be here. It was lovely also to hear Keeble. The last time we met, it was in Mekelle, and it was celebrating Ashenda, women's celebrations. So that was a wonderful event. It stuck much in my mind, and it's lovely to see you again. And it was very inspiring to hear you as well, as ever. I was down to talk about the impact of sexual violence in the Tigray conflict. And we're also, though, looking at the same time with discussions on how human rights defenders can engage, concrete strategies for countering impunity, and commitment to amplifying voices. And as Miriam very rightly said, we're doing that at a time when it looks as if, and I think it was Gebre Christos who particularly said, the international system is broken. Martin pointed to the need for hope. I think we need to work out what hope looks like and how, as an international community, we make progress. And that's making sure that the voices are respected, which Keeble said, and also making sure that those of us who are allies to the people in those situations also make sure that we live up to our responsibilities, because these are human rights. They're not rights of some people and not others. They're general human rights, and we all have an obligation, in my view, to make sure that they're honoured, albeit, the circumstances now are not ideal. And I just wanted to go through a few pointers, in particular, that I learnt during that visit to Tigray, and then also look perhaps at some more concrete steps. Because there are quite a lot of players in the international human rights arena. And what I've heard today in particular are the stories from the grassroots, it's the stories from the community who are, if you like, at the coalface of fighting these human rights abuses and surviving them. And your voices are obviously absolutely key to be heard. And one of the first things that I heard in Tigray was the need to listen to what people are saying and to listen to what justice looks like in those communities. I've got a very simple, if you like, Western sense of justice. Justice is what happens when people go to court and there's a court case and then there's a decision made and it's carried through and there's penalties and so on. What I heard from the women in Tigray was much more nuanced. And let's bear in mind that these women were the survivors of what has been described as the most weaponized example of sexual violence in conflict, certainly in this century, and which has also been so carefully documented because, the first inquiry into the sexual violence in Tigray was actually at the end of 2020. It was when Filson Abdi went there after she'd heard rumours when she was still a government minister, and she went up there and she discovered those rumours were true, and she submitted a report which was promptly suppressed. And there have been inquiries since then as well. So it's very well documented. But what isn't well documented is what the justice should be like. And what I heard was a lot about reparations, and Ilham mentioned that as well, about what the women in Sudan wanted. It's an immediacy that they needed the tools for survival and they needed the tools for rebuilding their lives. I heard quite a lot about prosecuting the commanders, much more about prosecuting the commanders than the frontline soldiers. And I also heard a lot about collecting the evidence, and there are organizations, quite a lot of organizations in Tigray that are doing that. And I also heard some criticisms about the idea of truth telling, which is something which, in the UK, you hear a lot of people saying, oh, it's truth and reconciliation, truth and reconciliation. What I heard, which actually makes a huge amount of sense, is that if a man stands up and says he's raped a woman, that he shouldn't be applauded for that. That shouldn't be a reason to excuse him for any kind of punishment or justice. And if he is excused, if it's said, oh, you've done well, you've told the truth, that's actually not justice, that's impunity. So I heard a lot about that. And I think some of these lessons are the ones that we need to shape internationally, to make sure that when through our governments and through our international agencies we talk about justice and we talk about upholding human rights, that we actually are really sure that what we're arguing for is what the people at the sharp end of it want. And I had to rethink a lot of things that I'd taken for granted after that visit to Tigray. I think the second thing which we need to do, those of us who are outside the immediate conflict areas, we need to hold our governments to account much more carefully than we do now. I know it's difficult, but where those of us have access, we have to use it, and we have to use it about the detail and not just say, oh, it's really bad, this war should end, but we go down into the detail of what ending the war means, what peace means, and what then happens about reconstruction. And if I could just give you an example, which just horrified me, that happened recently. The UK government, which has a big commitment to ending conflict-related sexual violence, it agreed a programme for advancing women, peace and security in Ethiopia between 2024 and 27, and put £1 million into that programme. And it was supposed to be targeted for women at the grassroots. It seems to have managed to have completely bypassed any of the grassroots organisations for women in Tigray, and it's gone mostly, it seems, to the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission's work. So in addition to raising issues about, yes, we have to have the commitments there, but we have to make sure that the detail is followed through, so that those people for whom that money could make a real difference, and those women who, as Kokob said, need a platform of some sort, that they get the support, and they see in the international community, they can see allies. We also need to fight back, and there's a mention here about hate crimes and hate speech. We also need to fight back at the argument, which is very pervasive now, particularly in the sort of Western populist political parties, that we don't have the right to comment on what's happening in other countries. Now, of course, independent countries are independent and they have their own governments, and the governments are accountable to the people. But the whole basis of the international human rights legislation is precisely to ensure that people are able to exercise their human rights, and that they can look to international allies for support in that. I think that the the No More campaign, which the Ethiopian government ran in a key part of the Tigrayan conflict, was very powerful in terms of denying the right of people around the world to comment about what was going on behind the scenes in Tigray, the indiscriminate killings and the appalling sexual violence. And I also completely agree with what Gebre Christoph said about the need for unity. So I don't want to talk on much longer, but one thing I would like to say is that what we've heard today is a lot about the communities at the grassroots. And the very powerful advocacy that given the tools, the communities are more than able to speak for themselves. The people are more than able to speak for themselves, and I certainly saw that very forcefully in Tigray. I mean, I recognised a lot of the women in the IDP camps as the women who are the prime activists in my own community where I live as well. And if those communities are to be able to share experiences, it might be that Miriam, I hate to put more work for you, but if the EPA could provide a forum in which the experiences could be shared, the learnings could be shared, and people could also find strength in each other's arguments and hopes and aspirations, and also in their day-to-day practices. So if that would be possible, I'm sure that in addition to the many sort of international fora that exists for human rights advocates who are lobbying the UN and lobbying international governments, it might be really helpful to have a forum that would bring together those experiences and provide the real grassroots up arguments and advocacy for what is best going to support people to exercise their rights in the very difficult situations in which many of them find themselves. I think that's all I want to say. There's also, I accept a very big responsibility on those of us in some countries to make sure that we keep up constant arguments about the need for internationalism, that we make sure that the solidarity programs and the support programs continue to be in place. And as Martin says right at the outset, that we never lose a hope of creating a very much better and fairer world. Thank you very much.